Eat little at a time, and only at need, for these things are given to serve you when all else fails. One will keep a traveler on his feet for a day of long labor, even if he be one of the tall men of Minas Tirith. A star shines upon the hour of our meeting, wherever you happen to be in Middle-earth. Thank you for joining me today on another Tolkien video as we take a look at the mysterious waybread of the elves, Lembas. We are first introduced to it during the Fellowship of the Ring, as Galadriel has it prepared for the Fellowship to aid them on the rest of their journey as they leave her realm. It is told to have more power than meets the eye. But where did it come from, and what truly was it? Let's talk. Now when it comes to the disclaimer, moving forward I'll probably only flash it on the screen for about 5 seconds and not talk over it anymore. If you want to pause it and take a look at it, that's awesome, but it's a little redundant for me to mention it every video. So this is probably the last time I'll talk over it. So yes, we are introduced to Lembas, or Lembas, during the Fellowship of the Ring, but in fact its history and origins date much further back than the War of the Ring. Back all the way to the First Age of Middle-earth, and perhaps even further back than that. What we know about the history of Lembas comes from the works of the lore master of the Noldor in Gondolin, Bengolod. With his name in Sindar meaning teaching sage or doctor of lore, it's he who is regarded as one of the greatest lore masters of all the Eldar, maybe only being surpassed by Feanor or Rúmeal. Following the fall of Gondolin in 510 of the First Age, he escaped to the havens of Sirion, and it was here where during his stay he wrote many of his works. One of these works, titled quite literally of Lembas, is where our story gets off the ground. It was in this text that he wrote that Lembas was created first by Yavanna, the Vala who was the wife of the smith Aule. In short, she was named the Fruit Giver and Queen of the Earth, as she was responsible for all the fruits and things that grew in Arda. In her home in the south of Valinor, she grew the special corn in the pastures of Yavanna that was used to create the first Lembas. Now, it wouldn't be a Let's Talk video without a quick side note, of course, so I'll get it out of the way now. I hope to one day cover this story in a video, but in the meantime, I can't suggest enough the second chapter of the Quenta Silmarillion titled Of Aule and Yavanna. It's probably one of my favorite stories in all of the lore, and has a lot of important themes about nature and dwarves and all the other children of Arda that I personally find fascinating. Anyways, back to the story. Now, when the elves first awoke at Cuiviénen in 1050 of the Year of the Trees, they dwelt on the shores for a long time in bliss under the starlight. As they stayed there upon the shores, in awe and contentedness at the beauty they beheld, they were first discovered by the dark tyrant Morgoth, or as he was known at this time, Melkor. Naturally, they feared Melkor, and distrusted him, and they were forced to hide away from him to evade his capture. Unfortunately, they could not all escape, and some of the elves were taken back to his dark fortress, Utumno, where they were twisted and tortured, creating the first orcs. The origins of the orcs, of course, is a widely debated topic, with Tolkien himself changing his mind over the course of his life. But it's a topic for a separate video. Years later, the remaining elves were discovered by Orome, the huntsman of the Valar, and he was in awe of the firstborn children of Ilúvatar. He returned to Valinor and pled with the other Valar, requesting the elves be brought back to Valinor to avoid the further capture and corruption by Melkor and his servants. The Valar agreed, and Orome returned to Cuiviénen to bring the remaining elves back to the safety of Valinor. Amongst other items, Orome was then given the Lembas by Yavanna to feed the firstborn on their journey. The waybread would aid their strength and allow them to return. In 1105 of the Years of the Trees, they set out, and this would come to be known as the Great Journey, or the Great Journey to Amand. Now, the traditions of the creation of Lembas were passed down throughout the ages from house to house of the High Elves in Valinor. There were, however, a few things to note. The custom set forth by Yavanna was that only women should make Lembas, and only few would know its secret recipe. Furthermore, only the elven queens should keep and give out the Lembas as they saw fit. When it came to its production, the corn used to create Lembas was a hardy and enduring plant, and only needed a small amount of sunlight to grow. Unlike other plants and crops, this corn could be sown regardless of the season, and grew swifter than its counterparts. It was, however, prone to the corruption of Melkor at times, especially when it was grown in Middle-earth while he dwelt in the north of the world, sending his northern winds throughout the land. We read in The Peoples of Middle-earth, "The Eldar grew it in guarded lands and sunlit glades, and they gathered its great golden ears, each one by hand, and set no blade of metal to it." With the description of waybread, it's hard not to infer things about Tolkien himself. A devout Catholic, he himself acknowledged it was one of the few times in his works that something he wrote was an explicit symbol of Christianity. In this case, its comparison of Lembas to the Christian Eucharist. It's also reminiscent, especially in the story of the Great Journey and the stories we are about to discuss, of manna in the Old Testament. Manna was the edible substance that God bestowed to the Israelites during the story of Exodus, which discusses their 40-year travels throughout the desert. Before we go back to seeing more tales involving Lembas, it's worth noting that he may have also been inspired by his real-life involvement during the First World War. As a soldier, it's likely that he ran into, or at the very least was aware of the bread hardtack, which was often used during sea voyages and other military campaigns as a primary food source due to its nutritional value and its long shelf life. During the First World War, with a majority of food sources in short supply, hardtack was inexpensive to produce and was long-lasting. While I think he may have drawn inspiration from hardtack for the physical description of Lembas, the symbolism of the Eucharist and perhaps manna in Exodus, as a special item to be honored and revered, is more likely the case. Back to his works, we find another example of the use of Lembas a little later, this time during the First Age, as the epic tale of Turin Turambar is being told. During this age, we learn of the Kingdom of Doriath, an elven realm which at the time was ruled by the elven king Thingol, and his queen, Melian the Maya. Melian was of the race of the Maiar of Yavanna, and it was said she was unsurpassed in both wisdom and beauty in Middle-earth. For thousands of years, she used her power to guard and defend the realm of Doriath from Melkor, and this came to be known as the Girdle of Melian. Turin, who would come to be known as arguably the most tragic character in all of Tolkien, was fostered in the care of Thingol and Melian in Doriath after his mother Morwen sent him away for his safety. As Turin grew, he remained in contact with his mother and sister, Nienor. However, one day, the messengers ceased to come, and Thingol no longer sent for them. By this time, Turin was of age to serve in the armies of Doriath. Fearing the safety of his mother and sister, he requested armor and a weapon from his foster father Thingol. Thingol granted his wish and bestowed upon Turin the dragon helm of Dor-lómin. During the many battles on the marches of Doriath with the forces of Melkor, he befriended Beleg Cuthalion, or Beleg Strongbow, who served as the chief march warden of Thingol. After 3 years of fighting, Turin finally returned to the capital of Doriath, Menegroth, the Thousand Caves, where, before he had the air of a noble foster son of the king of Doriath, he now appeared wild and unkempt. This drew the criticism of a noble at the court, whose name was Cyros. Cyros had resented Turin since the day he arrived in Menegroth, being jealous of his status with the royal house, although Turin was technically an outsider. If the men of Hithlum are so wild and fell, of what sort are the women of that land? Do they run like deer, clad only in their hair? Cyros taunted Turin, to which Turin assailed him with a drinking vessel, which grievously hurt Cyros. The next day, Turin was waylaid by Cyros, but Turin, being a seasoned warrior now, overcame Cyros, and forced him to march from Menegroth, clad only in his hair, in the same manner he had mocked Turin. Cyros began to flee in terror and flung himself by accident into the chasm of a stream, and he was never seen again. Fearing the judgment of Thingol, Turin fled from Doriath into Sirion, where he joined a band of houseless men. These men were the sworn enemies of all the evil which lurked in the wild during that age: elves, and men, and orcs. Unbeknownst to Turin, Thingol had pardoned him after he learned that Cyros had attacked him. It was at this time that Beleg had returned from the marches and was tasked with finding Turin and returning him. I grieve, Cuthalion, for I took Hurin's son as my own, and so he shall remain, unless Hurin himself should return out of the shadows to claim his own. I would not have any say that Turin was driven forth unjustly into the wild, and gladly would I welcome him back, for I loved him well. During this chapter in The Children of Hurin, Melian bestowed a store of Lembas to Beleg, wrapped in leaves of silver. Before he departed with this gift, she also gave to Beleg the power to share the waybread to whomever. And this power, which was reserved solely for the queen, was given to him. For Melian so favored Turin in this moment, with this gift, for never before had men been allowed to use this waybread, and seldom ever after did so again. When Beleg finally finds Turin, he tells him of his pardon and offers his share of the Lembas to Turin and his company. Although he refuses at first, he is consoled by Beleg, and the love of Turin, the man, and his foster family, the elves, and Doriath, is restored in the moment. Finally, of course, we arrive on the most notable instance of Lembas, and that is in the Fellowship of the Ring. The Lady Galadriel, when she still lived in Valinor, was once a pupil of Yavanna and Aule, and it is likely here that she was taught the recipe of Lembas. Later on, when we find her in Lorien, during the War of the Ring, she has known and has likely been using Lembas for herself and her people for thousands of years. So when the Fellowship passes through Lorien, and Galadriel bestows upon them the waybread, it echoes the millennia before, where Melian had bestowed this gift also to non-elves. In my own opinion, this may have stood above all the other gifts that Galadriel had given to the Fellowship, and was symbolic of her faith in their mission. After the Fellowship was separated following the events of Aman-Hen, Frodo and Sam would subsist on the waybread after all their remaining food had been gone. We see in the films that at one point, Frodo even offers Gollum some of the bread, but he doesn't eat nasty elf bread. As the trio makes its way through the secret stair into Cirith Ungol, the power of the ring has almost fully taken Frodo. In fact, the entire group is tired, exhausted, and hungry. In one last-ditch effort to turn Frodo against Sam so that he can have Frodo alone finally, Gollum takes the last remaining waybread and sprinkles it on and around Sam. He persuades Frodo that Sam has been stuffing his face every chance he could get, and keeping the food from Frodo. In this moment, even the sacred gift of the Valar, passed down through the ages from Yavanna herself, and bestowed upon Frodo, fell, and was tarnished by the corruption of Melkor through his servant Sauron, and the power of his ring as it turned friend against friend. Whether it was intended or not, it's a powerful last image that even the sacred bread of the Valar was not free from the corruption of evil, until evil itself is destroyed. After the conclusion of the War of the Ring, with the departure of Galadriel back to Valinor in 3021 of the Third Age, and the death of Lady Arwen in the Fourth Age, the tradition of farming the corn of Yavanna and the making of Lembas was lost forever in Middle-earth, and presumably was only ever after seen in the blessed lands of Aman. Along with many of the other magical and wonderful people, places, and things of Middle-earth, it too passed on into legend. And there you have it. That is the brief story of Lembas, one of the books and film's most iconic items. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'd love your feedback and comments down below on what you guys would like to see next. As always, thanks for watching, take care, and be good to each other.